Let's move on. We're still looking at the perceptual area, but let's look at selective attention. This has been on quite a few times, but the important thing about this topic area is it's very, very important, and I want to point out one thing about the sort of the answers we get to some questions in this area of the specification. Okay, so selective attention. Most people tend to understand this sort of stuff. We're just going to point out one or two things. In previous years, if you put, when the question came up, what do you understand by the term selective attention, and you put, there's too much information in what's coming into your head, if that's the right phrase to use, or so you saw too much information in the environment. The environment, don't forget, refers to what's going on around you, not the weather, it's what's going on around you. And we can only pay attention to a limited amount of material, the relevant stuff, and we tend to ignore the irrelevant stuff. Okay, that's the standard answer. Now that used to be, that second bullet point used to be worth 2 marks. But we ignore the rubbish and concentrate on the important stuff. 2 marks. Now it appears from last year's exam that's now going to be worth 1 mark. Okay, so it's that sort of idea. So it's gone from being a 2-mark response to a 1-mark response. That's relatively important. Second thing is selective attention takes place between, now I've put STSS deliberately because if you put STSS in the exam, it will be marked as incorrect. They will not accept abbreviations. That is the short-term sensory store. And that's what you've got to put in the exam. And that's not the STM, it would be marked wrong. You've got to call it the short-term memory. And if you're going to talk about either of those two for any length of time in an answer, yes, you can put the full name and then put the abbreviation in brackets and then carry on using the abbreviation, but you've got to use the full name somewhere. Now the other thing that's important about selective attention, what it does, its job, its function, rather than what it is that it speeds up decision making, because you've not got to look at and concentrate on, and proper words, attend to so much information. You will speed up decision making. That's quite important. That's quite important. Now, the important slide. Get a highlighter pen out. Get something you can sort of circle some of these responses. Quite often in the exam, you'll be asked in questions 3 or 4, the skill part, to state what this is, what do you understand by the term selective attention, and then how can you improve selective attention. So you'll get questions like, what is reaction time, or what is response time, and how can you improve, how can the coach improve your response time, or what do you understand by the term long-term memory, how can we make sure things are stored in long-term memory. Now the important thing here is those how can you improve type answers tend to be 3-mark questions, and the same answers carry over to each of those 3 areas: improving selective attention, improving response time, improving storage in long-term memory, all have the same requirement. It's on here, so we'll highlight them as we go through. You can improve selective attention quite easily by making the stimulus brighter, louder, sharper, or whatever. Now that works to a certain extent with memory. It works to a certain extent with response. You make the stimulus stand out. So the other way of saying that is the second one coming down is to highlight or focus on appropriate cues. Those first 2, really important. Make it stand out. Tell the learner what they're looking for. They mean the same thing, essentially. And if you can make it stand out, you will remember it. If you make it stand out, you will improve your selective attention. If you make it stand out, it will improve your response time because you're spotting the stimuli nice and early. So that's common across all 3 of those responses. Second one that's common, mental rehearsal. Sit down and think about it. Mental rehearsal improves performance. Mental rehearsal improves selective attention. Mental rehearsal improves response time. Mental rehearsal improves storage in memory. Next one is specific to selective attention. You ignore distractions. You learn to ignore the relevant stimuli. And then the next one, the fifth one down, yeah, lots and lots of practice, but I promise you they won't accept the word practice on its own. You must give a prefix to that word. So words like relevant or specific or realistic are the words you've got to be looking at. So prepare at the top, change or focus on the appropriate cues, change intensity, mental rehearsal, lots of realistic practice, 3 marks for improving selective attention, improving response time, improving memory storage. And just because it's selective attention, by the way, you'll also get quite well if you motivate. I know there's other answers. There's about 10 ways you can improve selective attention, but we're trying to cut it down so there's not too much to memorize. And just to prove it to you, there's no need to do this question. I've just stuck it in there. This is from last year's exam paper. Last year's exam paper, so presumably it won't be delivered again, but it's that question we talked about. Outline selective attention. How can you improve selective attention? Quick look at the mark scheme. Filter out irrelevant, retain relevant. That's the thing we said. Okay, receives information from short-term sensory store, no abbreviation. Speeds up decision making. That's what it does. And then look at the answers for how can you improve it. Relevant practice, increase intensity, mental rehearsal, highlight cues. There are others, but why learn the others when they work across different questions? Quite important, that idea, and you stick with it. Because although selective attention may not come up this year, response time certainly could. Okay, here's one that no one can do. Students really struggle with this idea of a thing called schema theory. Schema theory says you do not store motor programs for every single skill there is. What you do store in your long-term memory is a generalized motor program, for example, for throwing. And then what you then store is every time you have a throw of anything, you store relationships between bits of information. In the exam, you need to write down the correct terms. Correct terms, you get credit. Incorrect terms, you don't get credit. You've got to use the correct terms. And occasionally, they may ask you to say, okay, you've used the correct term, but what does it actually mean? So this is how we're going to do this. The correct term and what it actually means. You've just got to learn these, guys. Sorry. So, before you perform a skill like throwing, you will refer back to memory and see the relationships that are there, stored, hanging around, so we can adjust the motor program.